Today we're going to talk about the best news today, which is that Bob Stoops named Hal Mumme as his offensive coordinator in the XFL, and all that's coming up after the bump.
What do you mean you don't subscribe to my son's YouTube channel?
Mama, no!
Just snap the damn ball, RJ.
What's up, kinfolk? It's RJ Young. I am not on a step mill. Consider hitting the like and subscribe button because I upload a video every single day. It's always OU related, college football related, sports related. We have a good time. And today, Hal Mumme has been named the offensive coordinator for Bob Stoops' XFL Dallas team, which means we get full-on air raid in the XFL in 2020. And I got this bit that I wrote a while ago about Hal Mumme and about the air raid, and I'm going to read it to you because, well, I think it's that good, and this is awesome, and I've been looking for an excuse to drop this Hal Mumme air raid stuff on you for a while now, and here we are. So, without further ado, here I am writing about the air raid. What does it take to run the air raid? It takes savvy, arrogance, and wisdom, and I don't think it's a stretch to say air raid godfather Hal Mumme was all three. Hal Mumme's life was so full of football that his wife had to schedule an induced labor to fit the birth of their child into his itinerary. My goodness. In Mumme's biography, The Perfect Pass by S.C. Gwynn, tells a story about how bad Iowa Wesleyan College was at football when he arrived. As head coach at IWC, Mumme tried to recruit a heralded wide receiver named Dana friggin' Holgerson. He sent a message into Holgerson's English class that said Mumme would like to talk to him. Holgerson sent a message back that, with respect, he'd rather finish his English class. Mumme's playbook does not exist. He didn't make one because he didn't want his players thinking too hard about what they were being asked to do. I guess that makes him Kevin Murray. There were only 15 pass plays and 6 run plays in his entire scheme. And though the offense did run those plays out of various formations, still 15 plays, 6 runs. On the brink of one of the biggest games in school history, Sports Illustrated's Douglas Looney spoke to Mumme, then head coach at Valdosta State, that's in Georgia for those of y'all that don't know, about how his team was built. Mumme said, quote, "We don't stretch, run sprints, we don't practice on Mondays or Fridays. And when we do practice, we never go longer than an hour and 45 minutes. All this is so we don't waste the players' time, and we never scrimmage in the fall to avoid injuries. So, when I recruit offensive linemen, I say, look, all you have to do are 3 things: lift, jump rope, and eat. There's probably one of these 3 that you like already." End quote. While he was the offensive coordinator at the University of Texas, El Paso, he spent an entire month in the state of California because the university could not afford to fly him back and forth. He eventually got fired from that job. Several months later, he was hired as the athletic director and head football coach at Copperas Cove High School. This despite Mumme having coached just 2 teams in 10 years that had winning records. My goodness. Nothing much changed while he was at Copperas Cove, not Grove. In his first 3 years, Mumme didn't have a winning season. But it was the way they lost that began to show signs that Mumme's teams were not only getting better, but that a funny-looking pass-happy offense he chose to tinker with in real-life Texas high school football games was working. See, that's what Mumme's deal was. He wanted to come up with an offense that would allow him to win football games with average players against superior players. The best way you do that, to his mind, was to make use of every blade of grass on the football field. You could only do that by spreading the field with wideouts and chucking the ball into open space. There was proof that this not only could, but did work. It worked in the 1930s when Texas Christian coach Dutch Meyer popularized the spread offense with no fewer than 4 wideouts in formation at a time. It worked in the 1950s and 1960s when Tiger Ellison was inspired by a bunch of kids playing backyard football in Middletown, Ohio, to begin diagramming what would later be called the run and shoot offense. It worked for Sid Gilman's Los Angeles Rams and San Diego Chargers when passes were about timing rather than yardage. It worked for when Bill Walsh put together his San Francisco 49ers, which made use of quarterbacks with quick releases while receivers ran short economic routes that frustrated the defense 5 yards at a time. Mummy wanted to add something brilliant to those schemes and that growing philosophy of passing first. One of Mummy's breakthroughs came when his popularization of the wide receiver quick screen. Upon first glance, watching the quick screen looks like the wackiest, most unfulfilling pass play ever. It really just looks like an extended high-risk handoff. After all the quarterback does is take the snap from the center, spin around, and throw a horizontal pass to a wideout who has taken a single step backward to catch the pass. Then, the wideout is left to try and outduel a defensive back who has seen the whole thing develop in front of him and has a good opportunity to make a tackle for a loss. But the play was genius for two reasons. The first came with the realization that Mummy should let his quarterback and wideouts make decisions for themselves. If the cornerback played bump and run, throw it behind him. If he played 10 yards off, throw it in front of him. That became the kind of point of Mummy's offense. Throw it where they ain't. The second reason came after Mummy attended a coach's clinic where University of Southern California coach John Robinson gave a talk about the philosophy behind his famous sweep right running play. The play, better known as student body right, sent the whole offense to the right side of the field to block for the tailback. The sheer mass of men cleared the way against most average teams for the tailback. Against the better teams, it didn't always work, but as Robinson explained, it did force the whole defense to honor it. And there's nothing fun about having to sprint 10 yards at an angle over and over again, especially if you're playing defense on the weak side of the field. Eventually, weak side and middle linebackers are going to get tired. With tired linebackers, eventually, that tailback is going to go 60 yards to the house. Today, you see variations of the quick screen at every level of football. When Mummy held his first team meeting at Iowa Wesleyan, only two players showed up. One was the punter, who looked like a stiff breeze might knock him over. The other was a big guy who looked like he might halfway be able to play a little football. But when Mummy told his team, all two players of it, that they were going to lift weights hard during the offseason to prepare for the season, the great big guy stood up and walked the hell off. Mummy had to build an entire roster around a single player, a punter, before the season started. He and his newly hired offensive line coach, Mike Leach, created his team mostly out of Texas kids who weren't offered scholarships anywhere else and junior college kids who needed another chance. His starting quarterback, the same he'd had at Copperas Cove, had all but given up on football when Mummy convinced him to give it another go with him at Iowa Wesleyan. And this would be the group of kids Mummy would rewrite NAIA record books with in 1989. Mummy was on his way to creating a smallest of the small college juggernaut when he was told he was going to be fired at the end of the 1991 season. No matter, he took Leach with him and created another one at Valdosta State. And Valdosta State is where Leach's name for the offense finally began to take hold. Mummy didn't really care what Leach called the offense, but Leach, who had acted as Iowa Wesleyan sports information director and had been promoted to offensive coordinator at Valdosta State, wanted to give the offense a name to get more reporters to write about his team in an age when broadsheet was still king. He thought Air Raid had the same panache as Steve Burrier's Air Ball and Tiger Ellison's Run and Shoot. In Valdosta, Georgia, it was Kismet. Turns out the father of a Valdosta State wide receiver owned a genuine air raid siren from an actual carrier. The sound is terrifically alarming, and Valdosta State made a point of playing it after every Blazer touchdown, of which there were many. It was so annoying that the Gulf South Conference instituted a rule against noisemakers in the stadium. So Leach, being the pirate he is, convinced the Valdosta State fraternity near the stadium to mount it on the roof of its house and play every time his team scored. With similar talent, which is to say not a whole hell of a lot at all, they challenged teams in the run-dominated Gulf South to keep up with a pass-happy offense that fancied throwing the ball 60 times a game. 2 years after Mummy took the job, his quarterback, a walk-on named Chris Hatcher, won the Harlan Hill Award, the de facto Division II Heisman Trophy. Then in 1966, Kentucky called. At Kentucky, Mummy, Leach, and the boys rewrote school and conference record books again with quarterback Tim Couch. They turned a team that had gone 9-4 over the previous 3 years into the kind of squad that would knock off number 20 Alabama in its first year. The Wildcats hadn't beaten the Crimson Tide since 1922. They scared the bejesus out of SEC defense, so much so that when Florida defensive coordinator Bob Stoops, ding, 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 got the head coaching job at Oklahoma, he recruited Leach to be his offensive coordinator. Leach was so good at OU that he was offered and took the head coaching job at Texas Tech after just 1 year in Norman, where he laid the groundwork for the Sooners' 2000 national title run. What's more, Leach and Mummy have turned the Big 12 Conference into one that stands as a sort of league made in their image, with disciples littered all over it, running some variation of the air raid. One of Leach's first quarterbacks at Tech was Cliff Kingsbury, who is now the head man at Arizona. That'd be the Cardinals. TCU offensive coordinator Sonny Cumbie was also a Leach quarterback. Former Baylor head coach Art Briles was a Leach assistant. Houston head coach Dana Holgorsen was an offensive coordinator for Leach at Tech, and TCU former co-offensive coordinator Doug Meacham was wide receivers coach on Holgorsen's offensive staff at Oklahoma State. After he stopped dancing with the girl that brought him, Stoops hired offensive coordinator Lincoln Riley. Riley coached for Leach in one way or another for 7 years before setting a new standard for offensive output as play caller at East Carolina. In his first year at Oklahoma, Riley's offense helped the Sooners reach the college football playoff. Because Mummy was bullheaded, cocky, and willing to go almost anywhere that would let him try out his ideas, we get to see the best college football ever, and now professional football in recent memory. Balls are thrown all over the yard to anybody with a good set of hands, even a 400-pound lineman. Offenses have just two speeds, standing on the sideline and warp. Quarterbacks routinely row for 300 yards in a game, or if you play for Leach, 734. Wide receivers make miraculous catches on the regular, and coaches are more willing than ever to go for it on fourth down. It's a hell of a time to be a college football fan. And in large part, we have Hal Mummy to thank for that. All right, that's it for me.